Hello everyone, welcome to this session on Puppet. Today in this session, I'm going to teach you guys what is Puppet exactly and then move on to understand the architecture of Puppet. Once you have understood the Puppet architecture, we'll move on and I'll teach you guys the coding basics of Puppet that will be required in your day-to-day life while you will be working on Puppet. Alright, so guys, this is the agenda for this session. I hope it's clear to you. So now let's move on and start off with the first topic, which is what is Puppet. Puppet is nothing but a configuration management tool which is open source in nature, right? And it helps us in basically keeping configurations consistent with what we require and what is there on our production, on our test and our developer environments, right? Now the awesome thing about Puppet is that it can basically be installed on various platforms like Microsoft Windows, various Linux platforms, etc., right? So it is very versatile in terms of its working on different platforms, and also it basically does not use any programming language. It has its own declarative format in which you have to specify what basically if you want to install any type of or any set of configuration on any node or any group of nodes, the way to declare that is not dependent on any programming language. So Puppet has its own declarative language using which you can describe what kind of configurations you want on your slave nodes. Okay, so this is what Puppet is all about. Now there are some key features of Puppet which we are going to discuss next. So what makes Puppet so special? Why is Puppet so popular? So the first and foremost reason that companies adopt Puppet is because a lot of other companies have also adopted Puppet, and basically it is a tried and tested tool which helps every company in its configuration management needs, right? So Puppet has established itself in providing the configuration management needs, and therefore companies who are newly coming up and are trying to adopt configuration management, they prefer Puppet because a lot of other companies are also using it. The second point is that there is a lot of, Puppet being an open source tool, there's a very big community for Puppet which constantly keeps working on Puppet and keeps on adding features, keeps on resolving bugs, which makes the Puppet tool in itself very mature. Right? Why mature? Because if there is a tool which is privately owned by a company, obviously the kind of work which will happen on that tool versus what is happening on Puppet, it's going to be slow. Reason being, there are a lot of people who are working on Puppet, there are a lot of people who are enthusiasts, right, who are not being paid, they're just doing it because they love working on, or they love their profession and they love working on this tool which is Puppet, right? And out of that love they create features, they resolve bugs. So the quality of features and the quality that this tool has to offer is more than what a private company can produce, right? So therefore this is a key feature of Puppet, that there's a large open source community for Puppet which basically keeps on adding features, keeps on resolving bugs, and keeps the Puppet software in its most optimal state, right? The third thing is documentation. So documentation is very important for anyone who is trying to learn this tool, and there is an extensive documentation available for Puppet on their official website. Right? So if you don't understand Puppet, you don't have to take help from your colleague, you don't have to search for tutorials, just go to the Puppet online website and they have an extensive documentation on literally anything that you want to do with the Puppet software. Okay? And the fourth thing, which we have already discussed but is very crucial for its success, is platform support. Right? So Puppet can be used on Unix based systems, it can be used on Mac OS, it can be used on Microsoft Windows, it can be used anywhere. And because of this versatility of it being installed anywhere, it is very popular among companies where the fleet of servers are on different platforms, right? Their web server could be on CentOS, their DB servers could be on Ubuntu, so on and so forth. You could have multiple environments or multiple platforms in your company which are basically serving different purposes, but Puppet as a software can be installed on all of them and your configuration management need is solved because of that, right? So these were some of the key features of Puppet, why Puppet is so popular, right? So now enough of bragging about why Puppet is so great. In our next session, we're going to start with the core part of Puppet, right, which is the Puppet architecture. So before dwelling into how Puppet actually works or getting our hands onto the Puppet software, we're going to look at how the Puppet architecture basically works or how Puppet internally works with this slide, which talks about the master and the slave. So the core part of the architecture of Puppet is the master slave architecture. So there is one master and there could be numerous slaves which are being served by the master, right? So what happens basically, because Puppet is a pull configuration type of configuration management tool, so everything is initialized by the slave, right? So the way Puppet works is, so first the slave basically sends its state to the master, right? So when the master slave architecture is set up and everything is set, if there is any change on the master or if there is no change on the master also, the slave of Puppet, it time and again sends its state information to the master, and what master does is it checks whether the state sent by the slave is what is required from the slave or not, right? So there is a state for that particular slave which is defined on the master, right? So it checks against the state defined on the master whether the state is same or not. If the state is not same, if there is a change in the state, what master does is it sends the change catalog to their slave and tells the slave, okay, so these are the softwares and these are the versions that you have to install on yourself, right? So the Puppet agent then installs all these tools on itself or on the Puppet slave. And once it installs everything, it sends back a report to the master saying that, everything has been installed. Please check whether your requirements are now being met with my state or my metadata, which I'm sending it to you, right? So in the third and final step, master checks whether all the state is matching with what the requirements have been specified in its manifests, right? So this is a 3-step working of how the Puppet master and slave interact when there is a change which is supposed to happen on the slave. Similarly, now because there's a lot of communication or there's a lot of back and forth which happens between the Puppet master and Puppet slave, the communication which happens between these nodes is encrypted. And it is encrypted using SSL certificates, right? So there's an SSL connection which is established between the Puppet master and the Puppet slave, and the way it works is something like this, right? Now for SSL connection, we need certificates, right? So the first thing which happens is, because Puppet being a pull configuration type of tool, the Puppet slave first requests for the master certificate from the Puppet master, right? And which in turn the Puppet master, it sends the certificate back to the Puppet slave. So this happens instantaneously. Any slave which asks the Puppet master about its certificate, the master sends its certificate to the slave. But this is not where the connection has been established. Now what happens is, the moment master sends its certificate to slave, master also requests for the slave certificate, right? It requests the slave node to give master the certificate, and the slave obliges for this request and sends the slave certificate to the master, right? But still at this point, the communication has not been established, although the certificates have been exchanged, right? Now for the master to authenticate the slave, there is a manual step of signing the certificate that the Puppet slave is sending to the master, right? And in this step, basically the administrator or the DevOps engineer will go to the Puppet master and he shall sign the certificates of the nodes which basically he wants to attach to the Puppet master, right? Once the Puppet master signs the certificates of the slave, only then a secure connection is established, right? An encrypted connection is established, and then the exchange of data takes place. So this is how the SSL connection is basically set up between Puppet master and Puppet slave, and this will be more clear to you when we'll be setting up Puppet, which is basically our next session, where we'll be setting up a Puppet master and a Puppet slave on AWS, and we'll try to establish connection between them, and then I'll show you how you guys can basically sign certificates on Puppet master so that the connection becomes encrypted. So guys, here is my AWS management console. The first thing that I'll do is I'll have to launch an instance, right? So I'll select the Ubuntu AMI, Ubuntu 18.04. I'll select this. I'll select the T2.micro, which falls under the free tier. I'll click on next. I'll select the number of instances as 2 because I want to create one node Puppet Master server setup. So I'll mention the number of instances as 2. I'll click on next, add storage, and then I'll come to security group, right? So in the security group, what you have to do is you will have to have a security group which basically will allow TCP connection, all TCP connections from the IP address of your slave, right? Either you can do this, or what you can do is you can allow a TCP connection on the port 8140 from your this particular IP address, which is of the slave, if you want to be more specific, right? But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open all TCP ports and I'll say it can come from anywhere, and I'll click on review and launch. The moment you click on launch, you will be asked to specify the private key that you want to use. So I have one private key already there on my system, so I've specified that. Now basically your instances are getting launched. So let's label these instances as master, and the next one would become slave. Okay, so we've specified this. And now while they are launching, let's have a look at all the commands that we're going to use to basically install my Puppet master and slave. So guys, these are all the commands. So these commands will basically run on my master, and then these commands will run on my Puppet agent, right? And in the end, we are also going to verify if our master and agent connection is successful by basically creating a file from the master on the agent with this particular content. So don't worry about it. We'll come to this part and I'll explain you what this file basically means when we get to this part of having the file ready on our system. Okay, so for now, let's start with the master. Let's start installing master. So let's see if our instances are ready. So yes, they are in the running state. So let's connect to our master first. So this is the master IP address. I'll connect through putty, specify the private key. Now this will basically let me enter my master server. So let me just change the font settings so it becomes more clear for you. And let me choose a color for the master as well, so that we don't get confused between the master and the slave. So this is my master server. All right, so while I connect to my slave, let me just update this machine. So while this machine is getting updated, what I can do is I can connect to my slave. So this is my slave, guys. Let's connect to it using putty. So this is my IP address. Let's specify the private key as well. And now we are connected to our slave as well. Awesome. Let's change the font setting for this. Let's make it a little bigger so that you guys can also see this. All right, so now we are on our slave machine. Let's update this machine as well. All right, so meanwhile our master is now updated. Now let's go back to our notepad to see what we have to do next. So we have to install wget first. So wget is pre-installed on AWS. We don't have to do this. Next step is basically to download this particular file. Let's do that using wget on the master. So the file is downloaded, and now let's unzip the file using this command. So the file is unzipped. Now let's install Puppet Master here. So we are installing Puppet Master. Puppet Master is now being installed. Once it's successfully installed, we can check the installation status by going to the policy. So Puppet Master is nearly installed now. And now let's check the content of the policy. So yes, Puppet Master has been successfully installed. And now what I can do is I can check the status of the Puppet Master service. So this is the service status. So it is active and running. So that's awesome. So that's what we wanted. So our Puppet Master is now installed on our system. Next thing is to basically fine tune some settings. So let's do that. So we'll edit this file, which basically are the defaults for our Puppet Master for running. Right, Here we are. So basically your Puppet Master by default would use 1 GB of memory, but since our system is also 1 GB, what we are going to do, we are going to mention that the Puppet Master can only use 512 MB of the memory. So Puppet Master can work in a 512 MB memory as well if you are dealing with less number of nodes. So since this particular setup is for our demo purpose, so we can mention 512 MB for our Puppet Master, which should be enough. So we'll save the file, and now the defaults are ready. And now for applying the defaults, we'll just restart the Puppet Master over here. So Puppet Master is now restarted, and now we'll open port 8140, through which basically Puppet communicates with the slave through the firewall of the OS as well. So that's done, and we're set. So Puppet Master is successfully set now. Let's go to our slave and start setting up our slave as well. So on a slave, we have updated the machine. wcat is pre-installed. We'll first download this particular file. So the file is downloaded. Let's unzip the file. The file has been unzipped. Now let's install Puppet. So earlier we installed Puppet Master. Over here we're installing Puppet, which is nothing but Puppet Agent, right? So once Puppet Agent is installed, I have to manually start it, and we can do that using this command. But before writing this command, what we have to do is we have to go to each machine and change the host file, right? So in the host file, I have to mention the IP address of the master. So we'll have to do this for both the machines. So let's specify the IP address like this, and let's specify the master's IP address in the master as well, and in the slave as well too. So we'll do a sudo nano /etc/host, specify the IP address, write Puppet in front of it, and save the file. Alright, so now we are ready to start the Puppet agent. So let's do that. So Puppet agent has now been started. Let's enable Puppet as well, which basically means on restart also, Puppet will be started automatically. So this is done as well. Alright, so now some steps happened in the background which we were not able to see. What were those steps? So that was basically what we discussed in yesterday's class. So the moment Puppet slave starts, it basically sends a request for the master certificate. How does the Puppet slave know where the master is? We just specify the IP address in the host file, right? So it knows where the Puppet master is. So it sends the request to the master. The master in turn sends the master certificate, and at the same time it also requests for the slave certificate. So this when the master requests for the slave certificate, the Puppet slave basically sends the slave certificate, and now we have to go to Puppet master basically. So we are here. We'll say sudo puppet cert list, right? So this should basically list any certificates which have been sent to the master. So let's check if we have any. So as you can see, we have a request from the Puppet slave on the master. So how do we know it's the Puppet slave? You see this IP address 172.31.44.167, and if we compare it with our slave, it's 172.31.44.167, right? So that's the slave's certificate which has been sent to the master. So we'll have to sign it now. So for that, the command is sign. And if there are more than one certificate or more than 2 or 3 certificates and you want to sign them all you have to do is sudo puppet sign and then -- all. Specify this and your certificate is now signed, right? So my Puppet master and Puppet slave can now interact with each other. So our next step is to verify this. So what we are going to do is we're going to come back over here, and now basically we are going to create a manifest. Now, what is a manifest? A manifest basically specifies what all changes have to be made on the agent or on the slave, and these are the changes that we are going to do. So basically we are creating a file which exists in this particular directory, right? So the Puppet master has to ensure that this file is present on this directory, and the permissions, the read write permissions of this file is this, which is the user should be able to read write and the other users of the OS should be able to read this particular file. Okay, and what should be the content of this file? The content should basically be it works on, and then the IP address of the slave. All right, so this IP address is going to change with every machine on which this file is going to exist. So this is going to be the content. So let's create this particular file. So for that, first I'll have to create a path on the master. So this is my master. Let's create a path. Path is created. Now let's edit the manifest file on the master. So this is the manifest file, and the content of the file should be this. Let's copy it, paste it over here, save the file, and once the file has been saved, all you have to do is restart Puppet Master. So I'll restart Puppet Master like this. So my Puppet Master has now been restarted, and all I have to do is go to the Puppet, and since Puppet is a full configuration tool, the slave has to request for the changes. So I'll say puppet sudo puppet agent hyphen test, right? So before I run this command, I want to show you guys that basically there is no file inside temp which starts with I. So I'll go inside temp, and if I do an ls over here, you can see there's no file called it works. So now what we're going to do, I'm going to say sudo puppet agent hyphen test. So this command will basically ask the master for the is there any changes required for this particular server. The master will send the changes to the agent. The agent will make those changes and send the report back to the master. So I'll hit enter now, and now you can see that there has been some things which have been done, and you can see a file has been created in /temp. Let's verify this. So let's do an ls now. So I can see a file has been created, it works. And if I do a cat on this file, I can see the contents of this file is it works on, and then the IP address of the slave, which is this, right? So congratulations guys, your Puppet Master slave setup is now complete, right? So now you can use the Puppet Master slave to basically do configuration management. So you'll just have to specify the configuration on the master, and then it will be applied on the slave. All right, so the most basic or the unit of coding in Puppet is basically a resource. So what is a resource? A resource could be a file, it could be a command, it could be a package, it could be anything, right? So this is the basic thing that you define in a Puppet catalog, which basically has to be executed or placed on the agents, right? And the way to define a resource is like this. So basically first you define the resource type. So like I said, it could be a package, it could be a file, it could be anything, right? And then you define the resource name. Okay, for example, if it's a file, you'll specify the path over here. If it's a package, you'll specify the package name over here, and then you specify the attributes, whether it has to be installed, whether it has to be present there, whether it does not have to be present there, what is the permissions of the file. So all that can be declared in the attribute and the value, and then you close the brackets, which basically means that this particular resource has been finished, this particular resource has been defined. Now don't worry if you get scared, don't worry if you are basically getting scared with the syntax. So let me go ahead and show you an example which will clear things out more than what we are understanding over here. So guys, this is a sample syntax for a resource. So over here we have basically defined a package. So say you want to install Nginx on agent, all you have to do is define this resource. So what is Nginx? Nginx is basically a package. So the resource type goes package, the package name is Nginx. And what do we want with Nginx? We basically want to ensure that it is installed on the system on which we are targeting on, right? So this is how you define a resource in Puppet, and through this you can basically configure your agent's configurations using the resources. So basically whatever resources you mention gets installed on the agent. All right, moving forward now guys, when you combine a bunch of resources, now of course when you're dealing with an agent, it's not just one resource that you will install. You could be installing hundreds or thousands of resources together, right? So all these resources combined, they have to be one entity, otherwise you'll have to define each and every resource separately, probably in a separate file. So to solve that problem, what we do is we come up with something called as manifests. So what are manifests? Manifests are nothing but a combination, or they basically group resources together, and they are defined inside a one file, and that file is called the manifest file. Okay, so the manifest file can have multiple resources inside them, and once a manifest file is basically applied on an agent or on a slave, all those resources are installed one by one. All right, with this guys, let's go ahead and start by creating our first manifest in Puppet, right? So what we're going to do is, let me jump onto my master. So guys, this is my master. Now the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a manifest, so that basically if I want to install say Apache on my agent, how would I do that? So what I can do is I will go inside cd/etc/puppet. Here you go. And now inside this directory you will have something called as code, right? So you'll have to go inside code, then there will be something called as environment. We'll go inside environment. Let me just do an ls over here. Okay, so we have to create a folder called environment. We do not have a folder called environment by default. So what we can do is you can create a path. So I'll do a sudo mkdir -p, and let me specify the path now. So I want the environment folder, and inside the environment folder I want a folder called production. Now inside production I would need a folder called manifests, and inside manifests I will have to create a file. Alright, so let's first create this path. So this path is now created. Let's go inside this path. So we'll go inside environments, inside production, and inside manifests. Okay, so now we will create a file called site.pp. So let's do that. So what I'll do is I'll type in nano site.pp. Okay, and I'll hit enter. So this has to be backed up by a sudo nano site.pp. Awesome. Now the first thing that I would do is I'll have to specify the node. So right now we are not getting into which node we have to specify here. So we'll just specify node is default. That means that any agent who is basically requesting the master for an update, these whatever we are going to write over here is going to be applied on that agent automatically. Okay, so what we first want to do is say we want to install Nginx. Okay, so I'll say package. So first I have to specify the resource type. This I specified, and then I'll specify the resource name. So this is the package name Nginx. I've specified that, followed by a colon. Then I specify the attribute. So the attribute is ensure, which should be equal to installed, right? Followed by a comma, and now I'll close the package. That's it. So this is one resource that we have defined inside a manifest. Now let us define one more resource. So what basically I want to do is I also want to create a file, and the file should exist in /tmp, and the file name should be say status.txt, right? So again it will be followed by a colon. Then I'll specify the attribute. Now the attribute for a file would be, the first thing that I would say is content. What should be inside that file? So inside that file there should be a text which says Nginx installed. Okay, followed by the mode, which would basically specify the permissions of this file. So say I want the permissions to be 0644, followed by a comma. Okay, so everything seems fine till over here. So what I'll do now, I'll do a control X, Y, enter. So my file site.pp is now saved inside the manifests folder, which exists inside the environment production. Okay, so this is done. Now what I'll do, I'll go to any of my slaves. So let's go to slave 1. This is my slave 1, guys. So what I'll do, I'll just type in puppet agent -test. right? And I'll specify it with a sudo. So let's hit enter. Okay, so we'll have to specify hyphen test, and we'll hit enter. And now it says applied catalog in 0.01 seconds. All right, so let's check if we have the tmp file over here, which should have a status file. So the status file is not there. Okay, I think the name of the folder should be manifest. Let's check that. Alright, so I think guys I got the problem. The folder name has to be environments. Okay, so because if you look over here, alright, so let's try this. So let's try to change this folder name. So for that I'll have to come out, again come out, and now let's just copy this folder, cp-r, let's call it sudo, change the environment folder to environments, and let's move it so that it gets renamed itself. So let's do a cp here. Okay, that's done. And now let's just remove environment. Done. So if I go inside environments now, let's just check if everything is there. So production is there, manifest is there, and site.pp is there. So let's try to do a test again. So it says there is an syntax error at the end of the site.pp file. Let's check what syntax error are we dealing with. So it's a good thing that we're getting a new error now. So I'll do a sudo nano on site.pp, and okay, so here's the problem guys, we didn't close the bracket. So let's close it, save the file, come back over here again and do a Puppet agent test. So now I think we are progressing. Okay, so the catalog has been applied, and now let's check if the software was indeed installed or not. So how we can check that? We can basically just go to our EC2 management console. We did this on slave 1 test, right? And let's just go over here and paste this IP address. So yes, Nginx has been installed on slave 2 automatically. Again, if we want to check, so what we can do is we also wanted a file, right? So what we'll do, we'll do a cat on /temp with the status. So yes, status.txt file also has been created, and if you do a cat on that, it says Nginx is installed. Awesome guys, so we have successfully implemented one manifest on your slave, which has basically installed Nginx, and it has created a file on the agent itself as well, right? So congratulations guys on your first manifest. Let's see what is next in our slides. All right, so we've basically created a manifest. Let's go ahead and see the different things we can do with the manifest, right? So there are 3 components of manifest. Basically, we can call these components, which can be used inside manifest for greater functionality. The first component would be variables, right? So you can use variables inside a manifest file to basically store values and then pass them on to the body, or you can basically create variables inside any or at any place inside the manifest, and then that variable can be called inside any resource, right? So let's try and check this. So if you can see of the example over here, the example says that it creates a variable called $text and it saves the value hello world inside it, and then it creates a file, right? And the content, it says hello world over here, but basically what we're going to do is instead of this, we are just going to put $text. Let's see what happens. So if I go to my terminal, so this is my master. So let me just change the site.pp. So what I'll do, I'll create, so like the slide says, you can create the variable anywhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called text, and let's say the text says Intellipaat DevOps course. Okay, let's say it says this, and the content would basically be changed, and the content would go something like this. it will be $text. Okay, let's try to save it and let's go to our slave one and let's see if we can do something with it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try and do the test again. So sudo puppet agent hyphen test. Let's hit enter. All right, so something happened. Let's check. So cat/tmp, the file name would be same, status.txt. Let's see what it says now. So as you can see, the text has changed to Intellipaat DevOps course, and this basically value was taken from the variable. As you can clearly see that I defined the text inside the variable, and that variable was called over here, and this content was basically added to status.txt, and this is exactly what we wanted. Awesome. So you have seen how variables work, but now let's make it a little more interesting. So let's talk about loops, right? So what are loops? So whenever you want to run something iteratively without having the need to write the code again and again, that's basically the main use of loops, right? Now, how can you use loops in manifest is something like this. So say you want to install multiple packages inside your slave, right? Say I want to install Nginx and I want to install MySQL Server. So how can I do that? Now, in order to do that, what I'll do is in my variable, I'll basically create an array. So basically I've created an array which contains two values. One is Nginx and one is MySQL Server, right? And then inside the packages, what I've done, while I'm naming the package, I've basically called the variable $package, and then I've ensured that these packages are installed, right? So let's try this code out. So what I'm going to do is let me switch to my terminal, and this is my master, guys. So let us remove some code from over here, and this is what we want to deal with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called packages, and let's give the values inside packages. The first value that I want to give is, say, Nginx is installed on slave 1. Let's try to install Apache 2, right? And let's try to install MySQL Server. Okay, so I'm gonna show you guys that if you see right now inside my slave 1, if I check, do I have Apache 2 installed to service, Apache 2 status, you can see it says the Apache 2 service could not be found. So once we run this test, let's see what happens, right? So first I want Nginx to be removed. So what I can do is sudo apt get purge Nginx. So I'll just remove it manually from over here, and then this should remove Nginx. Yes, so Nginx has been removed. So I can just verify that by going over here and refreshing on the IP address. Let me just see if the service is also down. Service Nginx status. Service is running, so let's stop the service. So service Nginx stop. We'll have to add a sudo. Yes, so Nginx service is now stopped. So if I refresh it, I can see that the website says the site can't be reached. Awesome, this is what we wanted. Now what we are going to do is I'm installing Apache 2 and I'm installing MySQL Server on my agent. So I have specified the site.pp on the master. And now let me go to my slave 1. So this is my slave 1, guys. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to test. So sudo puppet agent -- test. I'll hit enter. And now it's basically applying the catalog. So my Apache, so first let's check if Apache is installed. So if I go to the browser and if I hit refresh, let's see what happens. Okay, so it still says it can't be reached. So let's check where the problem is. So if I do a service Apache 2 status, it says the Apache 2 service could not be found. That could basically mean that probably there's some problem in my site.pp. Okay, so here it is. Here is the problem. So I did not change the value of the packages over here. So I just have to specify packages, and I'll have to save the catalog, and that's it. If I come back here, if I again do a puppet agent test, let's see what happens now. All right, so Apache 2 has been installed, and as you can see in the browser, it automatically refreshed, and now you can see the Apache page. It is now installing MySQL Server. So let's wait for it to install MySQL Server as well. Okay, so MySQL Server is also created. Awesome. So Apache 2 service is now installed, so we can also check it on the browser, sorry, on the terminal. Service Apache 2 status, and you can see Apache is now running on this slave. Similarly, if I want to check service MySQL server status, so MySQL D status, I'm not sure what the name of the service is. Service MySQL status. Yes. So MySQL service is also active and it's running. So we successfully installed two packages, two softwares on this machine using loops in manifests. All right. So let's come back to our slides. So we are done with variables. We're done with loops. Now let's go ahead and understand what are conditions. Alright, so now let's discuss conditions. So conditions are basically statements which helps us to take a decision based on a particular output. For example, over here, we say we are using the basically making use of the keyword only if, right? So only if this command is successful, only then it will basically run this particular command, which is Apache 2 is installed, right? Otherwise it will not run this particular command. And what this command is basically doing, this command is basically putting this text which is Apache 2 is installed inside this particular text file, which is /tmp/status.txt. okay, so this command says only if this particular command goes true, it should execute this particular command, right? And what is this command doing? This is basically saying, is Apache 2 present or not? So if Apache 2 is present, it will return something on the command line, otherwise it will not. So only if command ensures that if this command goes successful, this will return a code which is 0, and only if the code returned 0 is seen by this command, only then it will run this particular command which is written over here, right? If this returns the value false or 1, in that case this command will not run. So let's try this out. So let me go to my master terminal. So let's clear the screen first. So sudo nano init and sudo nano site.pp. all right, so what I want to do is I want to execute a command. So let's do that. So let's remove everything first. Okay, so basically I want to define a resource called exec, which basically deals in passing commands to the agent. So I want to do exec and I want to name this thing as, say, conditions, right? I want to name it something. Let us name it like this. So conditions. And what I want to do is I want to pass a command which basically says that /bin/echo. Say we are checking if Apache is present or not. So we'll say Apache 2 is installed. So we'll say this, and this has to go inside /tmp/status_apache.txt. this will go over there. So this command should run only if the command the command would be /bin/which Apache 2, and only if this command is successful, it should run this particular command, right? So, and now we'll just close the resource, and that's it. Let's save the file, and now let's come to our slave, which is this. Let us try to run the test. So sudo puppet agent -test. This basically has now created a file. So let's see if the file has been created or not. cd/tmp/status_. So we don't have a file over here. So let's see status_. Okay, so let us go inside TMP first and then do an ls. So I can see status_apache file is present. So I'll just cat it status_apache.txt. So it says Apache 2 is installed. Reason being, over here do have Apache installed. But let us go to another slave which I have connected to my master. Let's see if we have Apache 2 over here. So service Apache 2 status. So Apache 2 is installed over here. Reason being, okay, so it has been a lot of time. So this basically, because Apache 2 manifest was present on the master, this slave also requested master for the manifest or for any change, and the master told this slave to install Apache 2 and all that. No worries. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sudo apt get and I'm gonna purge Apache 2. Okay, so this will uninstall Apache 2. And now if I do a sudo service Apache 2 status, so it says Apache service is not found. Now what I'll do a sudo puppet agent hyphen test. So in this case there should be no file which should be created. Okay, so if I hit enter now, let's see what happens. So it says executed successfully. Now let's check what just happened. So I'll go inside /tmp. I'll do an ls over here. It has a file called status underscore apache. Let's check that. So status underscore apache. What we can do is probably this could have been created earlier. Let us remove this file first. Status underscore apache we have removed. We'll have to add a sudo here. So it's removed now, right? Let me just check if this command actually works or not. So /bin/which apache 2. So it is running service apache 2 status. That's not there. So we'll have to remove this particular file. So we can do that. So sudo rm /user /sbin/apache 2. Either we can do this or, okay, let's first do this and then we can probably try something else as well. So user sbin/apache 2. Okay, so now if I do /bin/which apache 2, yes, it's not returning anything now. So what I'll do is I'll just do an ls here. Okay, so my status file is not present, and now I'll do a sudo puppet agent hyphen test. I'll hit enter. Alright, so the catalog has been applied. Now let's check inside tmp file. So cd tmp, we are inside, and now let's check by doing an ll, or let me do an ls. Okay, so we don't have the status underscore apache file over here. Now it can be present over here. All I have to do is change the content. So we just learned about only if, right? Now let's learn about unless. So what unless means is until and unless this file or this command is not sending me 1 or is not false or is not executing properly, till then do not run this command. The moment it does not or is not successful, run this command. Okay, so now what we will do is, because our Apache 2 is not present on slave 2, I can just change this to unless, right? And I can say Apache 2 is not installed. And now in this case, what will happen is if I go to my slave 2, I'll just do a puppet agent test again. And in this case, it should create a file inside the temp folder. So if I do an ls, it has the status underscore apache file. Let's do a cat on that, and it says Apache 2 is not installed. So basically we just made use of unless. So again, just for revision, what we just saw, unless basically deals with a command which it is waiting to become false. The moment that command becomes false, it will run this command. It will run this particular command which has been specified. Whereas the opposite of this is only if. Only if waits for this command to be successful, and only if this command is successful, this command will run. Unless this command is successful, this command will not run. Okay, so you can remember it like this. So with this, guys, we end the topic of basic coding in Puppet. So thank you guys for attending today's session. I hope you have learned something new today. So see you again in the next session. Goodbye and have a great day ahead.